Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The hammer slipped from his hand the moment he saw the ledger tucked beneath the attic insulation, its pages bound in leather, embossed with her initials, and a golden emblem of the state seal. Jake's breath hitched. He wasn't supposed to be up here, just patch the cracked wood before the storm hit, that's it. But now, this... He crouched low, heart pounding louder than the thunder rolling in from the hills. The house was old, weather-beaten. Its owner? A soft-spoken woman with silver in her braid and sadness stitched into her eyes. She'd offered him lemonade and cookies while he worked, had barely spoken about her life. But something about her had tugged at him, something unfinished. Jake was a single dad, scraping by with odd jobs, balancing bills, and raising his 5-year-old daughter Ellie. He didn't have time for mysteries, but this was something else. The edge of the ledger peeked out just enough. He hesitated, then pulled it free. The first page creaked open, and there it was. Maps, boundaries, signatures, titles, dozens of them. Land deeds, all registered under her name. Not just a house, not just a block. She owned land that stretched across 3 counties. Jake's stomach flipped. Why would someone like her, living alone, quiet, always in a wool cardigan even in July, own half the damn state? Suddenly, a floorboard creaked below. He snapped the ledger shut. Too late. "Mr. Walker?" came her voice from the staircase, soft but sharp. "You found it, didn't you?" Jake's mind raced. He stepped into the light and held the ledger in both hands like it might explode. I didn't mean to pry. It just was there." She stared at him, eyes unreadable. "You were meant to find it. I was waiting for the right person." Jake didn't know what to say. She nodded toward the kitchen. "Come down, I'll make coffee. You and I, we need to talk." He followed her down in silence. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old regrets. She poured 2 cups, hands shaking slightly. Set them down. Sat. "Start by telling me why a single father was fixing my roof for free," she said, voice calm, but pressing. Jake hesitated, then told her the truth, that he'd seen her porch caving in on his delivery route, that her roof had sagged worse after the last rain, that she looked like someone who'd once had everything and lost it quietly, that he couldn't walk away from someone like that. She listened, nodding once. Then she pushed the ledger back toward him. "Then I was right about you," she said. "You're the one I've been waiting for." Jake blinked. "I'm sorry. What does that mean?" Her eyes held him. "It means you need to know who I am, and why everything I ever owned is about to be taken away." Her name was Eleanor Ridley, name once whispered in state meetings, signed onto zoning laws, and feared by oil companies. 30 years ago, she had been one of the wealthiest women in the region. Her family had passed down land like heirlooms. She never wanted the empire, but when her husband died in a hunting accident, she inherited everything, including enemies. They called it an accident. She didn't believe them. Within weeks, court orders came, claims, lawsuits. Her family lawyer turned against her. Partners vanished. Her brother-in-law tried to have her committed. She fought and lost. One by one, her properties were stolen, transferred, rezoned, hidden in shell companies, all except a few plots too remote or buried under old contracts. What she had left, she stored quietly in that ledger. And for 29 years, she waited for someone who could help her finish what her husband started. Jake leaned back in his chair, stunned. "Why me?" "Because you don't want anything from me," she said, looking into his soul. "And you have everything to lose." The storm hit at midnight. Rain slammed the windows. Thunder rattled the pipes. Jake couldn't sleep. The ledger sat open on the kitchen table, illuminated by a single lamp. Maps, dates, warnings. Eleanor had gone to bed after giving him a name. Daniel Crow, a developer, a snake, the man who'd married into her family, then bled it dry. Jake couldn't believe what he was reading. Deeds forged, witnesses bribed. In one case, a sheriff paid to destroy survey records. All roads led back to Crow. And now, he was running for state office. The next morning, Jake loaded Ellie into the truck and drove back to town. He was just a handyman, a father. Not someone who could take on a political monster, but something inside him had shifted. If Crow had stolen Eleanor's life, how many others had he stepped on? He dropped Ellie at daycare, then drove to the county recorder's office. An old friend worked there, Liza. They'd gone to high school together. Jake Walker, she laughed. You look like hell. What are you doing here? I need to see land records, he said. From the late 90s. She raised an eyebrow, but waved him in. You got 10 minutes. He found them. Ridley versus Crow. Lost, dismissed, buried. But then, something strange, a parcel of land still registered under E. Ridley Trust. Untouched. Jake printed everything. As he walked back to his truck, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A deep voice crackled through. You've been asking the wrong questions, Walker. Jake froze. Back off, or we make your daughter disappear. The line went dead. He didn't go home. He couldn't. Instead, he drove straight back to Eleanor's house. She was already waiting at the porch. They called, didn't they? Jake nodded, jaw tight. They know about Ellie. Her face hardened. Then we don't have time. There's one more thing you need to see. She led him to a locked cabinet behind the fireplace. Inside, wrapped in velvet, was a stack of letters. His heart sank as she handed him the top one. It was addressed to his mother. He stared at her. What is this? Her voice was barely a whisper, because, Jake, I knew your mother. We were friends, and you, she stopped. You were supposed to inherit all of this. Jake's knees buckled. What the hell are you saying? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You're not just the one helping me. You're the one I was protecting it for. The inheritance? No one spoke about. Jake Walker stared at the letter, trembling in his hands, heart pounding so loud he barely heard the rain now hammering Eleanor's tin roof. The name on the envelope was unmistakable. Maggie Walker. His mother. He hadn't seen that name written in anyone else's hand in over 15 years, not since she passed away from ovarian cancer when he was just 19. She had never spoken of Eleanor, never mentioned anything about land or family trusts. Start talking, he said hoarsely, trying to steady his voice. Now. Eleanor didn't flinch. She folded her hands gently in her lap and took a deep breath. Your mother and I grew up together. We weren't just friends. We were like sisters. We both married into families with more land than sense. But Maggie, she got out. She chose love over politics, walked away from the Ridley Crow mess, and she made me promise something. Jake narrowed his eyes. What kind of promise? Eleanor stood and walked slowly to the fireplace, pulling a small tin box from the mantel. She set it on the table between them and opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were photos, black and white ones, of two young women laughing near a lake. Eleanor and Maggie, maybe 18, maybe younger. Then came wedding photos, a newspaper, clipping of local heiress weds rancher's son, and finally a hospital birth certificate. Jake leaned forward, his breath caught. Jacob Samuel Walker, mother Margaret E. Walker, father unknown. He looked up, stunned. What is this? Eleanor's voice was steady. It's proof. Maggie wasn't just my friend. She was my cousin. Our grandparents owned this land, yours and mine. And when she left it all behind, she asked me to protect what little was still hers. She was scared. She didn't trust Crow. She knew he'd come for it all. Jake pushed back from the table, chair screeching across the wood floor. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Because she was trying to keep you. Safe, Eleanor said sharply, rising now. You were a baby, Jake, and after your father disappeared, things got dangerous. People around the family started dying. Quietly, quickly. Maggie didn't want you anywhere near it. Jake paced the floor, fingers in his hair. This was too much, too fast. He came to fix a roof. Now he was being told he might own parts of the county and that his mother was caught in a decades-old war. This is insane. Eleanor walked over and put a wrinkled hand on his arm. No, Jake, what's insane is letting the man who murdered your family walk into office without stopping him. Jake's eyes snapped to hers. Murdered? Eleanor nodded, face tight. Your uncle, Maggie's brother, was killed in a staged robbery. Your grandfather was found drowned in a lake where he'd never swum a day in his life. And Maggie? I believe Crow got to her too, slowly, silently. Stress, fear, heartbreak, they all took years off her life. Jake's blood turned to ice. He remembered his mother's long silences, her distant looks, her refusal to ever talk about her. Past. Maybe it wasn't grief. Maybe it was fear. The next morning, Jake sat in his truck outside the county recorder's office again. He hadn't slept. Eleanor's files were in a duffel bag in the passenger seat. Letters, deeds, maps. Proof. But how could he prove his own birthright? He picked up the birth certificate again. There was no father listed, just his mother. And the hospital closed down years ago. Still, he had one lead, his mother's old attorney, David Halpin. Jake hadn't spoken to him in years. The man had handled Maggie's will and estate after she died. He was quiet, methodical, and always seemed to know more than he let on. Jake dialed his number. A slow, gravelly voice answered. Halpin Law? David. It's Jake Walker. A pause. Jake. My God. It's been what, 15 years? I need to see you. Today. Another pause. I figured this day might come by before lunch, and bring the files. Halpin's office was tucked between a pawn shop and a bakery, like a secret folded into the town's backbone. Inside, the smell of old wood and legal pads greeted Jake like time hadn't moved. David looked older, thinner, more wrinkled, but the same steel behind his glasses. Jake laid the ledger and letters on the desk. David took his time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I warned your mother. I begged her to testify against Crow's people, but she was terrified. She knew what happened to those who spoke up. Jake leaned forward. Is there anything that proves I'm entitled to that land? David opened his drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. I never mailed this. Your mother made me write it. It's a sworn affidavit. She wanted it to be handed to you only if you ever got involved. He slid it across the desk. Jake tore it open. Inside, in his mother's shaky handwriting, was a confession. She'd left her family fortune to Eleanor for protection, and designated Jake as the successor in trust, if he chose to reclaim it. I need to make it legal, Jake said. Today, David shook his head. Crow's running for state senate. The moment you file anything, you'll be targeted. Jake's jaw tightened. He already threatened my daughter. David's eyes narrowed. Then you have no choice but to finish this. Later that afternoon, Jake picked Ellie up early from a daycare and took her to the lake. The same lake from the old photo with Maggie and Eleanor, the one he hadn't been to in years. She laughed as she ran down the dock barefoot, her curls bouncing. For a moment, it was just a quiet afternoon with his little girl, but Jake's eyes scanned the tree line. Someone was watching. He felt it. That night, he sat with Eleanor in the study as she handed him a final set of documents. This is the Ridley Trust. It lists you as beneficiary now. Jake flipped through it. What if Crow challenges it? Eleanor smiled, a fire rekindled in her gaze. Then let him. It's time someone dragged him into the light. Just then, a rock smashed through the front window. Jake dove for the floor, pulling Eleanor down with him. Glass scattered everywhere. A note was tied to the rock. Back off, or she's next. Jake's hands shook as he untied it. Eleanor looked up at him, pale but calm. They're scared, she whispered. Jake looked at the note again, then at the fire crackling in the hearth. No, they're desperate. By morning, Jake had made up his mind. He dropped Ellie off at His neighbors, someone he trusted, and drove straight to the courthouse. Inside, he filed the necessary documents to trigger a hearing: Eleanor's trust, his mother's affidavit, property deeds, the whole legacy. When the clerk stamped them received, a wave of fear washed over him. But also something else: resolve. Jake stepped outside into the sunlight. His phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a video. He pressed play and froze. It was a live feed of Ellie playing in the neighbor's yard. Then the camera turned and pointed to a man in a black SUV across the street. Then the screen went black. Jake's knees nearly gave. Out. Blood ties and bullet warnings. Jake's hands trembled as he stared at the frozen image on his phone. Ellie, laughing, innocent, completely unaware a stranger in a black SUV was watching her. He pressed replay, hoping, praying it had been a mistake. Maybe it was old footage, a coincidence. But no, the timestamp was from 20 minutes ago. And that man had turned the camera toward his daughter with a calculated slowness that made Jake's skin crawl. They weren't just watching. They were sending a message. He slammed the truck into gear and tore down the street toward the neighbor's house, rubber screaming across asphalt. The engine growled beneath his fury. By the time he skidded to a stop, Ellie was standing on the porch with her little pink backpack and a popsicle. "Daddy!" she beamed. Jake knelt, scooping her into his arms. He tried to smile, but his heart was thudding too fast. "Did anyone talk to you?" he asked gently, brushing a curl from her cheek. She blinked. A man waved from a car. I didn't wave back. He forced a laugh. "Good girl." Jake looked up at the neighbor, Mrs. Rayner, a retired school teacher with a sharp eye. "Anyone strange hanging around?" he asked casually. She frowned. "Now that you mention it, there was a black SUV parked across the road for about 5 minutes. Windows tinted. Drove off when I came out to sweep the porch." Jake's jaw tightened. They were escalating. Back at Eleanor's cottage, Jake called Halpin and demanded a rushed court hearing, but the attorney's voice was grim. "You've stirred a hornet's nest. There's word Crow's people are sniffing around the courthouse already. Some files are disappearing." Jake's heart sank. "Disappearing," Halpin sighed. "Jake, Crow's roots run deep. He's got people on payrolls all over the county, clerk's office, sheriff's department, even zoning commissions. If you want this to stick, you need something bigger than an affidavit and a dusty old trust." Jake looked over at Ellie, sitting cross-legged on Eleanor's floor, playing with crayons. "You mean a smoking gun?" Halpin paused. "Exactly." That night, Eleanor revealed something Jake hadn't expected. "There's a place," she said, "where your grandfather hid records. Ledger books, letters, the kind of things Crow thought he destroyed years ago." Jake leaned in. "Where?" She hesitated. "The old barn, on the east ridge of the land your mother signed over to me. It's half collapsed now, but your grandfather built a root cellar beneath it. Only 3 people ever knew it existed. Me, your mom, and him." Jake stood. "Then that's where I'm going." The barn looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Weeds clawed up its sides. Its roof sagged. Rusted tools hung like forgotten ghosts on the outer wall. Jake left Ellie with Eleanor and hiked the mile alone, flashlight and crowbar in hand. Inside, dust choked the air. Rotten hay crunched underfoot. He searched until he found what looked like a false floor beneath a feeding trough. He jammed the crowbar between 2 boards. Crack, the wood split. A staircase spiraled down into darkness. Jake hesitated only a second, then descended. At the bottom he found a metal chest, padlocked, but it was old. One good blow and the lock popped open. Inside, dozens of bound ledgers, cassette tapes labeled with dates, photos, Crow with men in dark suits exchanging envelopes, and letters, signed, dated, evidence of fraud, intimidation, payoffs, possibly even murder. Jake stared at it all, His family hadn't just been betrayed, they'd been systematically erased. He reached for a letter addressed to Maggie. Suddenly, gunshots. Jake dropped to the floor. More shots, splintering wood above. Someone was upstairs. He grabbed the metal chest and darted for the staircase, but stopped. He couldn't carry the whole thing without slowing down. He stuffed what he could into his backpack. 3 ledgers, a handful of tapes, and 2 letters. Then he ducked behind a wooden beam as the barn groaned under weight. Boots. Jake's breath froze. A flashlight beam cut through the dust. Someone called out, low and cold. "We know you're in here, Walker." Another voice. "Crow says this is your final warning." Jake held his breath. Silence. Then a Molotov cocktail smashed through the barn window. Whoomp! Flames exploded across the dry hay. Jake grabbed his bag and sprinted for the back exit he'd seen from outside. He kicked the door open, ducked into the trees, and didn't look back. Smoke rolled into the sky behind him. By the time Jake reached Eleanor's cottage, the adrenaline had turned to shaking. Ellie leapt into his arms, and he held her like he'd never let go. Eleanor watched the barns glow on the horizon. "They're not going to stop," she said. "Not until you're buried like the rest of them." Jake sat at the table and dumped out the contents of his bag. "No," he said, voice steel. "Not this time." The tapes were key. One in particular was marked July 12th, 1992, Crow, Ridley Sr. confrontation. Eleanor's eyes widened. "That's the day your grandfather was found drowned." Jake grabbed an old tape player from Eleanor's shelf. Static. Crackled. Then voices. "You think you can keep that land from me, old man? It was never yours to begin with, Crow. Then maybe I'll take it, and you can go swimming for once in your life." Then a splash, struggling, gurgling. Jake's stomach twisted. They had a murder confession. He called Halpin. "You need to hear something," Jake said, "and we need to get this into the hands of someone outside this county." The next day, Jake drove to the nearest news outlet, 50 miles out in Baton Rouge. He met with an investigative reporter, Natalie Griggs, who took one look at the tapes and started recording everything Jake said. "You realize this puts your life in danger?" she asked. Jake nodded. "And my daughter's." She glanced at the documents, flipping to the page with, "The trust, naming Jake as heir. Then let's make sure it's public before they can silence you." 2 days later, the story broke. Local rancher. Tied to decades of corruption, new heir challenges land ownership. The article spread like wildfire. Audio clips leaked online. Eleanor's affidavit. Maggie's letter. The 1992 murder tape. Jake expected Crow to come after him with lawyers. Instead, he came with something worse. That night, a black van pulled up outside Eleanor's house. Jake was already watching through the window. He loaded the shotgun Eleanor had kept in the closet since her husband died. "I don't want blood," he muttered. "But you're prepared for it," Eleanor said quietly. He nodded. The van doors opened. 3 men stepped out. No uniforms, no badges. Jake stepped out onto the porch, shotgun slung over his shoulder. "You've got 5 seconds to leave," he called out. "Or I swear someone's going to limp home," the lead man smirked. "You don't scare us, Walker." Jake racked the shotgun. The click echoed in the dark. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just aiming." The smirk faltered. Then a sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind the van, lights blazing. Out stepped Deputy Marla Henson. "Step back, Jake," she called. Jake's eyes narrowed. "You with them?" She shook her head. "Nope. I read the article. I believe every word. And someone inside the department slipped me a copy of the tape." Jake lowered the shotgun slightly. "You're switching sides." "No," she said. "I'm finally choosing one." She turned to the men in black. "I suggest you leave before I arrest you for trespassing." The men hesitated, then got in their van and peeled off down the road. Jake exhaled. Deputy Henson looked at him. "You just painted a target on your back the size of Texas." Jake nodded. "Then let's make it a moving one." That night, Eleanor pulled an old photo from her drawer. Jake as a baby in his mother's arms. "She wanted you to grow up without fear," she whispered. Jake looked at Ellie asleep on the couch, curled up with her stuffed bunny. "She didn't get that," he said, "but Ellie will." Just then, Jake's phone buzzed, a number he didn't know. He answered. A deep voice came through. "You want the truth, Walker? Meet me where your mother was buried. Midnight. Come alone." Then, click. Jake stared at the screen. Eleanor looked at him, alarmed. "Who was it?" Jake's voice was a whisper. "Someone who knows what really happened to my mother." The midnight meeting and a hidden betrayal. The graveyard was silent. Midnight mist curled low around the tombstones, clinging to boots and shadows like secrets, unwilling to stay buried. Jake stood at the edge of Maggie Walker's grave, his mother's. Resting place, heart pounding, fists clenched in his jacket pockets. The voice on the phone had said, "Come alone." He had, but not unarmed. A small pistol rested at the back of his belt, not to use, just in case he needed it. Because whoever knew the truth about Maggie's death had waited 2 decades to speak, and tonight they had chosen him. The wind stirred. The tree branches overhead. An owl hooted once, sharp, then footsteps, slow, crunching gravel. Jake turned, hands steady. From behind a marble statue stepped a man, tall, late 60s, with a grizzled beard and deep lines cut into his face like etchings in stone. Jake narrowed his eyes. "Do I know you?" The man nodded but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a flask from his coat and took a swig before offering it to Jake. Jake shook his head. "I was there," the man said finally, voice rough with guilt and years of silence. "The day your mother died." Jake's chest tightened. "Who are you?" the man sighed. "Name's Emery Vance. I worked for Crow back in the 90s, ran errands, kept mouths shut, hauled trash that wasn't trash." He looked down at Maggie's grave. She wasn't supposed to die. Jake stepped closer. "Tell me everything." Flashback, April 15th, 1999. Maggie had been fighting Crow in court, her last shred of hope wrapped around Eleanor's help, and her father's legacy. She had a file, letters, documents, recordings, and she was ready to go public. But Crow found out. "They didn't want to kill her," Emery said. "Just scare her, take the evidence, torch her car maybe. But Mom, she didn't scare easy." Jake saw it in his mind, his mother on the dirt road that cut through the pines, confronted by 2 men. One he now knew was Emery. The other, "Who was with you?" Jake asked. Emery hesitated. Jake grabbed his collar. "Don't lie to me." "You owe her this," Emery whispered. "Sheriff Danner." Jake staggered back. Danner, the current sheriff, the same man who'd sworn to help them just weeks ago? "I didn't know he'd do it," Emery said, guilt etched in his voice. "She slapped him, called him a coward, said she had copies of everything. That's when he shoved her." Jake's throat tightened. She hit her head on the rock. She stopped breathing. And the fire? They torched the car to cover it, said she died in a crash. Everyone bought it. Jake turned to the grave. All these years. A lie. A cover-up. And the man who did it had kept wearing a badge, shaking his hand. "You came to me now. Why?" Jake asked, jaw tight. Emery lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "Because I'm dying," he said. "Liver. 6 months, tops. Thought I'd take some peace with me. But your daughter, she reminds me of your mama. Fire in her eyes." He handed Jake a flash drive. "That's got the real medical report. And a letter your mama left me to send in case something happened. I never mailed." Jake looked down at the old man. "You can still make this right," he said. Emery nodded. "I just did." Back at Eleanor's, Jake barely had time to explain what happened when headlights flared outside. A knock rattled the front door. Jake and Eleanor exchanged a look. He opened the door slowly. Sheriff Danner stood on the porch, calm, confident, too calm. "We need to talk," he said. Jake stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Danner eyed him. "You've been stirring trouble." Jake said nothing. Danner leaned in, lowering his voice. People like Crow don't go away just because of a few newspaper clippings and bedtime tapes. Jake held his stare. You're right, that's why I'm not stopping. Danner laughed, short and cold. You think you're a hero, Jake? You're a roofer with a kid and a dead end. These people, they build judges like they build barns. Jake's voice turned to ice. You pushed my mother's head into a rock and left her to burn. Danner's eyes twitched. You don't know what you're talking about. I've got your confession, straight from your old friend Emery. That cracked the sheriff's calm. Danner reached for his belt, but Jake was faster. He raised his phone. Smile, you're live. The screen glowed. Streaming, Danner froze. Step back, Jake said. Danner hesitated, then turned, walked to his car, and drove off. Jake ended the stream. Inside, Eleanor let out the breath she'd been holding. You've declared war, Jake nodded. Good, because I'm done hiding. The next morning, Natalie Griggs, the reporter, showed up unannounced, a folder in hand and fury in her eyes. You won't believe what just came through my inbox. She spread out pictures, satellite photos, drone shots, blueprints. What is this? Jake asked. Natalie pointed. This is why Crow's after that land. Not just oil, not just greed. There's lithium under it. Jake blinked. The battery stuff? Exactly. Crow made a deal with an overseas firm to mine the land. Billions on the table. Your inheritance is standing in his way. Jake looked at Eleanor. That's why he won't quit. Natalie nodded. If you want to stop him, you need to beat him in court and get the feds involved. Environmental, legal, you name it. Jake stood. Then let's do it. By the end of the week, Eleanor's property was placed under federal scrutiny, thanks to Natalie's article and leaked court documents. The trust naming Jake as heir was entered into a fast-tracked probate hearing, and Emery's signed affidavit, backed by the flash drive, was now in the hands of the Louisiana Bureau of Investigations. Crow's empire was starting to crack, but it came at a cost. Friday, 3 a.m. Jake woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright. Ellie's room. Flames licked the floorboards. He rushed in, scooping her into his arms as she coughed. Daddy, I've got you. He grabbed Eleanor, led her out the back as fire swallowed the porch. The cottage went up in a roar. Jake held Ellie to his chest as sirens approached. Firefighters worked fast, but the damage was done. The home Eleanor had lived in for 40 years, gone. They stood in pajamas in the yard, shivering, silent. Jake looked at the burn marks on the grass near the gas line, arson, and a message. This is what happens when you speak. Eleanor didn't cry, she just whispered, they still won't win. Later, Jake found something in the ashes, half melted but intact, a silver pendant, Maggie's. He closed his hand around it, remembering her voice, her laugh, her fight. Then Ellie slipped her hand into his. Are we safe, Daddy? Jake looked. Into her eyes. No, he said, not yet. Then he looked up at the scorched sky. But we will be. The trial, the trap, and the unthinkable betrayal, it was the trial of the decade. Locals packed into the courthouse, spilling into the corridors, whispering names once only spoken behind closed doors. Crow, Danner, Walker. Outside, reporters jammed the steps. Inside, Jake sat straight, his hand clenched around a worn pendant, his mother's. Beside him, Eleanor regaled despite the bruises life had dealt. On the other side, Natalie Griggs held her notepad, watching every tick of the clock, and just in front of them sat the man they had come to expose, Sheriff Danner, cool as ever, dressed in uniform like a mockery of justice. His lawyers flanked him, smug and suited. Jake stared at the back of his head. He remembered the voice that had screamed at night, begging for the truth. He remembered Ellie waking to smoke. He remembered Maggie's name forgotten by the very system. Meant to protect her, not anymore. The prosecutor stood. He began with quiet precision. We are here today because justice was never served. Because a mother was silenced, because 2 decades of lies have finally unraveled. Then came the evidence. Emery Vance's signed confession. The autopsy report proving blunt trauma before the fire. The GPS logs placing Sheriff Dana's cruiser near Maggie's cottage that night. Jake's blood ran hot as Dana's expression remained cold. It wasn't enough to watch the court listen. Jake needed them to believe. On the stand, Jake spoke. He didn't try to sound polished. He spoke like a roofer, a father, a son. My mother, Maggie Walker, wasn't perfect, but she was brave. She taught me that standing up costs something, but silence costs more. He pulled the pendant from his pocket. This was hers. It survived. Fire. It survived lies. And I'm standing here because I won't let the truth stay buried. He looked straight at the jury. You don't need to be rich to be right. Dana's defense hit back. They painted Emery as a dying liar. They questioned the chain of custody for the flash drive. They hinted Jake was desperate for money, a nobody chasing a story. But the room shifted when Natalie was called. She'd traced the lithium deal, the falsified land records, and the offshore accounts tied to Crow Industries and to Dana's campaign fund. The jury leaned forward. Crow, of course, wasn't in court, but his name lingered like smoke, like guilt. Then the verdict came in, guilty of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The room gasped. Jake exhaled slowly. Dana's jaw tightened for the first time. Still, he said nothing as he was led away. Jake didn't cheer. He just watched justice walk slowly out the door, wearing cuffs 20 years too late. That night, Jake stood alone by the edge of Eleanor's burned property. The land was still scorched, but above, the stars were bright. He whispered, "We did it, Mom." Ellie ran up beside him, hugging his leg. "Can we go home now?" Jake kissed her forehead. "We're building a new one." 2 weeks later, everything changed. It started with a letter delivered by courier, thick, embossed with a gold seal. Eleanor opened it slowly. "What is it?" Jake asked. Her eyes widened. "It's from Crow's legal team." Jake grabbed it. "What now?" He skimmed. His heart sank. Crow had filed a private civil claim against the estate, claiming the trust was fraudulent, signed under duress, claiming Jake wasn't the rightful heir, and the worst part, they had a witness, a family member, someone who knew exactly how to discredit Maggie's signature on the trust document. Jake blinked. What family? Eleanor sat slowly, ashen. "I think I know." They didn't have to wonder long. The next day, Carla Adams walked into their temporary shelter with a heavy purse and cheap perfume. Jake's estranged aunt, Maggie's younger sister. "I'm sorry," she said, fake tears already forming. "I didn't want to testify, but Mr. Crow's people said." Jake cut her off. "Said what? That you'd get a cut of the land if you played Judas." Carla flinched. "You don't understand. Your mother always treated me like I was less. Like I wasn't smart enough. She didn't even leave me a cent." Jake stared. "So you sold her out?" "I just told them the truth," Carla said, "that she was drinking again when she signed that trust, that she was under pressure." Jake laughed bitterly. "You weren't even there. You just want what's left." Carla's lips twisted. "You think a roofer with a kid can manage land worth millions? You'll lose it to taxes, lawsuits, wolves like Crow. At least I can make something of it." Jake's hands trembled. Eleanor stepped in front of him. "Get off my property, Carla." "You'll regret this," Carla said. "We already do," Eleanor replied. The civil case moved fast. Crow's team wanted to freeze the trust. Jake's inheritance, land, minerals, title, was all at risk of being seized or locked up in litigation for years. But that wasn't what broke Jake. What broke him was the letter Ellie found while coloring in her makeshift room. It had no return address, scrawled in crooked ink. "Tell your daddy to stop, or next time it won't be the house." Jake stared at it for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done since Maggie died. He wept. Later that night, Jake met Eleanor on the back porch. "I don't know if I can keep her safe anymore." Eleanor put a hand on his shoulder. "She's safest when you fight." Jake nodded, eyes red. "But Crow has people in every corner. Carla's lies might hold up in court. If we lose the trust..." Eleanor reached into her jacket and handed him a key. "To the storm shelter under the barn," she said. Jake blinked. "I built it with your grandfather in '81. Reinforced, hidden. There's a chest down there with papers your mother left me." He stared. "She made me promise to only give it to you if all else failed." Jake stood. "Then it's time." In the dark, beneath the old barn, Jake found it, a rusted chest sealed tight. Inside, faded files, photos, and a videotape labeled, simply, "For Jake." Eleanor brought her old camcorder and Jake inserted the tape. The screen flickered. Then Maggie's face appeared. She looked tired, but fierce. "Jake, if you're seeing this, I didn't win. But that doesn't mean..." "You can't." She smiled softly. "The truth is written down in there, about Crow, about the deals, about what happened the night I was followed. This land, it was never about money. It's about freedom, and I'd rather you be poor and honest than rich and compromised. You'll be scared, and you'll want to give up, but don't. You were born to break the chain, Jake." She looked straight into the lens. "I believe in you." Then the screen went black. Jake sat in silence. Something inside him clicked back into place, a fire that would not go out. He showed up at the courthouse the next day, confident. He brought Maggie's original deposition, sealed, notarized, time-stamped. He brought photos of her land use protest from 1997, showing her clear-minded, sober and active. He brought affidavits from 2 doctors Eleanor had quietly called, who treated Maggie in her final months and confirmed she was of sound mind. And finally, he brought the letter Carla had written to Maggie, begging for money after losing a gambling debt. The same year, she now claimed Maggie was mentally unfit. Jake gave the judge a tired smile. "I may not have money, but I have truth." By the time the judge gave his ruling, the entire room was silent. The trust would stand. Jake was the legal heir. Crow's suit was thrown out with prejudice, and Carla was charged with perjury. As for Crow, an indictment was officially unsealed later that evening: wire fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to destroy protected wetlands. Jake didn't cheer. He just walked out with his daughter, hand in hand. That night, Ellie looked up from her pillow. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "Are the bad people gone now?" Jake smiled. "They're not gone, baby, but they're running." She smiled and curled into him, and Jake, for the first time in 20 years, slept without fear. Rebuilt with love. Sealed by Firelight 6. Months later, the land was quiet again, but not empty. The charred remains of Eleanor's old farmhouse were gone, replaced by a modest yet beautiful new home, the kind Jake never imagined he'd helped design. Stone and wood, windows that caught the light, a garden already blooming, and in front of it stood Jake, hammer in hand, sun on his shoulders, sweat running down the edge of his jaw. But this time, he wasn't fixing someone else's broken dream. He was building his own. Jake paused, staring at the porch. Ellie had painted a wooden sign that hung from the beam. "Maggie's porch. Sit, breathe, be safe." Jake smiled. "She would have loved that," he said softly. Eleanor joined him, holding 2 mugs of sweet tea. "She would have loved everything you've done." He looked down, calloused hands cradling the tea. "I just followed her blueprint." Eleanor squeezed his arm. "No, you made your own." Life after the court battles had been quieter, but not without its own challenges. Jake declined most of the offers that came pouring in once word spread about the lithium deposit under his land. Corporations, lawyers, politicians, they all came sniffing around. He turned most of them away. He wasn't interested in selling out. Instead, he partnered with a small green tech firm that agreed to develop the land sustainably, employing local workers, giving back a percentage to the community, and honoring the conservation legacy his mother had started. He kept ownership, and more importantly, he kept control. Eleanor's land had also been cleared and cleaned. New fencing, solar panels, even a small wind turbine Jake had installed himself. Jake refused to let her pay for the labor. "You helped my mother," he said. "You raised me when she couldn't. This is how I say thank you." Eleanor had teared up, but let him finish the roof without argument. By spring, she had a working kitchen, hummingbirds by the feeder, and a porch swing with Ellie's handprints in cement beneath it. Ellie, meanwhile, was thriving. She had a new best friend, Daisy, a golden retriever rescued from a shelter. She was back in school, reading 2 grade levels ahead. At night, she'd curl beside Jake in front of the fireplace, tracing the edges of her baby blanket while he read her the stories Maggie used to tell him, but sometimes she'd ask about things too big for her age. "Daddy, why did Aunt Carla lie?" Jake would pause, then answer honestly. "Some people get scared when they don't have enough, and sometimes scared people make bad choices." Ellie would nod. "Did you forgive her?" Jake would take a breath. "I'm working on it." In late summer, a letter arrived. No return address. Jake opened it cautiously, but it wasn't a threat this time. It was a handwritten apology from Carla, sent from county jail. "I lost your mother long before she died. I just didn't know it until I saw you fighting for her. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but if you ever want to talk, I'll be here." Jake folded it carefully and tucked it into his old toolbox. He wasn't sure if he'd ever reply, but some ghosts, he realized, didn't need to be chased, just understood. Utestuum. One crisp September evening, Jake took Ellie up the ridge behind the house, the same ridge where Maggie used to sit and sketch the hills, long before fire took her away. They brought a lantern, 2 apples, and Maggie's old journal. He hadn't read from it in months. But Ellie wanted to hear more. Jake flipped to a marked page. October 2nd. "Jake helped me carry water today. He got soaked and laughed anyway. I hope one day he finds someone who sees that laugh and knows what a treasure it is." Jake smiled. Ellie leaned into him. "I wish I could remember her better." "You remember her every time you're kind," Jake said. "Every time you help someone without being asked." Ellie looked up, "Like when we fixed Miss Eleanor's mailbox." "Exactly." She looked back at the journal. "Do you think she's watching?" Jake nodded. "I know she is." They sat in silence. Then Ellie asked, "Are we rich now?" Jake laughed. "Well, not rich like in the movies, but rich enough for hot cocoa?" Jake grinned. "Definitely." She beamed, and in that moment he realized this was the real inheritance. Not land, not minerals, but peace, love, legacy. That weekend, Natalie Griggs returned. She stepped out of a small rental car, holding a plant in one hand and a camera slung around her shoulder. Jake met her at the edge of the drive. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said. Natalie smiled. "Figured I owed you both a visit." She glanced at the fields, then the ridge. "Looks different now." "Feels different, too." Ellie ran up to her, throwing arms around her legs. "You brought me cookies last time." Natalie laughed. "That's right, and this time I brought you a puzzle." Ellie gasped. Jake watched them, heart full. After Ellie ran off, Natalie turned back to him. "I also wanted to say thank you. That article changed everything, for me too." Jake tilted his head. "How so?" "I've spent a decade chasing stories that never stuck. But yours. It reminded people of what matters." She paused. "I'm starting a new podcast, long-form stories. I want to call the first season The Roofer and the Fortune." Jake chuckled. "Sounds like a fairy tale." Natalie smiled. "Sometimes truth is better than fiction." Later, They stood on the porch, watching Ellie chase Daisy through the grass. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Natalie asked. Jake shook his head. "No. Everything I want is here. Everything I lost led me to this." She looked at him. "Do you ever think about starting over, not just with land, but with people?" He met her eyes. There was something open, unspoken, but full of promise. Jake nodded slowly. "I think I already have." Autumn came like gold. Leaves fell across the ridge in amber waves. The harvest moon rose high one night, and Eleanor threw a small gathering. Neighbors, former workers, even a few of the lawyers who had stayed loyal. Jake grilled, Ellie passed out. Lemonade. And Natalie took photos that would later grace magazine pages under the headline, "Where Truth Took Root." As the fire crackled, Eleanor raised a glass. "To Maggie," she said, "to truth, to the ones who refused to stay silent." Jake stood lifting his cup, and to second chances. They toasted. The stars above blinked quietly. That night Jake tucked Ellie in. She whispered, "Will tomorrow be good?" Jake smiled. "I think it already is." Months later, a foundation was established. The Maggie Walker Trust for Land and Justice. It provided legal support for rural families battling corporate land grabs. It educated kids about sustainable farming, and it funded scholarships for single parents going back to school. Jake didn't care about awards. But when he stood on stage, receiving a community leadership medal with Ellie clapping in the front row, he felt something settle in his chest. Not pride, not triumph, just peace. On the first anniversary of the fire, Jake climbed the ridge alone. He sat beneath the twisted oak, a photo of Maggie in one hand. The wind was gentle, the hills quiet. "I kept my promise," he whispered. The leaves rustled as if she'd answered. Jake Walker never chased fortune, but he found something rarer than gold. He found purpose. He built a life from ash. And in the end, it wasn't the lithium that changed his world. It was love, sacrifice, and a single unfinished roof. The end.